Hello, my name is Susan Pai. I'm an immigration attorney, and I came across this remarkable book. I thought I would share it with my colleagues and the general public because I found it to be so helpful, and I use it every single day. I have listened to this book on iBooks and Kindle probably not less than 7 times in just a few months. And every time I listen to it, I learn something new. So I hope that this review will incentivize you to go out and either buy this book or download it to your mobile device because I think almost anybody could benefit from this book. So what is BIFF? BIFF is, as was written by a reviewer, a marvelous and succinct book on how to deal with high conflict personalities. And we've all had this experience. When conflicts arise, instead of looking for solutions, these high conflict personalities look for somebody to blame. They have an all or nothing approach. They think that it must be all your fault or else it might appear to be all their fault. And they just can't cope with that possibility for psychological reasons. They become preoccupied with blaming others in order to escape being blamed themselves. But you cannot point this out to them because that will simply escalate the situation even more. The author of this book, Eddy, characterizes high conflict personalities as individuals who have a repeated pattern of aggressive behavior that increases conflict rather than reducing or resolving it. And because they have whatever background they have, whether it's from a sense of entitlement or because of a childhood history of abuse perhaps, HCPs, when they experience conflict, it literally feels like a life or death struggle. And that's why they will rage against their target and engage in campaigns of destruction. They have all or nothing thinking, unmanaged emotions, very extreme behavior, and they are preoccupied with blaming another person. So, of course, HCPs engage in what Eddy calls Blamespeak, which is just a repeated, endless cycle of attack, defend, attack, and escalate. Now, all of us have responded in the heat of the moment in this manner. And just because somebody engages in Blamespeak doesn't mean that they're an HCP. And quite frankly, after reading this book, I realized it doesn't even matter if the person is an HCP because everything productive that comes out of this book is going to happen whether or not the person is a high conflict personality, is not a high conflict personality. You don't know whether that person is, or maybe they're just having a off episode or an off day and they engage in hostile behavior or have a hostile communication with you. And in all of those situations, even prophylactically, BIFF is just a good way to communicate. BIFF is very simple and very straightforward. I wouldn't say that it's easy to implement. As the author points out, you have to have a certain level of self-awareness, and you also have to be willing to change and evolve in a person, and I guess be the bigger person in order to accomplish your goal, which is to stop this vicious and escalating cycle of Blamespeak. If you learn how to deal with HCPs, you will have to learn how to shift the way you think about them so that you know what not to do as well as what to do. Both are equally important. And in some cases, you don't even have to respond to the HCP or the hostile communication at all. So how does it work? Well, as the author says, finding easy ways to avoid unnecessarily triggering HCP defensiveness will make your life a lot easier. The goal is to disengage from the HCP's Blamespeak or blaming behavior. By changing your own behavior, you can change the interaction and relationship dynamics. And as I said before, you can do this if you're a reasonable person, you're self-aware, and you want to learn and change. And that is the person for whom the author wrote this book. So what is BIFF? BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And of course, you need to buy the book in order to get a full explanation. But to say it in short, brief just means keep your responses brief. And when he says brief, he literally means 2 to 4 sentences, no more than 1 paragraph, which is exactly the opposite of what I used to do. So that right there was a huge improvement on my part and a very simple thing to do. The rest of them are a little bit more difficult. Your very short response needs to also be informative. You have an inclination to want to correct inaccurate statements, but that's really not necessary, and that will just make the HCP more defensive. You want to keep your response friendly, but you also want it to be firm. So you want it to be friendly because you don't want to engage in any one of the 3 A's, which includes admonishment, advice, or apology. And obviously you don't want to engage in admonishment or give advice because the HCP will take that and become more defensive and respond accordingly and stay in that frame of mind where he is defensive and escalating, or she is. And you want it to be firm. And I thought the simplest example of being firm was in law enforcement situations to give the subject 2 choices. And this is something that I've learned as a prosecutor myself and as an investigator myself. I'm a trained forensic interrogator, and that's exactly what we learn as interrogators. I just never made the connection from conducting interrogations and interviews to my daily life in dealing with hostile communications from colleagues or clients or even friends and family. And the easiest way to give a firm response is to either make it very clear what the consequences will be if a certain action is taken or not taken. Another way is to present the subject with 2 choices. One is clearly a bad choice and one is clearly a better choice. And so you're giving the HCP the choice, the decision to make his or her own decision. And that also takes him out of the defensive mode and into a more constructive conversation, or ending the conversation is actually what you're aiming for. So who is Bill Eddy? Well, he's got sort of an interesting, but it makes sense what his background is. He was a therapist for many years, and he was also a certified, or he is a certified family law specialist. He's a mediator at the National Conflict Resolution Center, and he was a clinical social worker with 12 years of experience in providing therapy to children, adults, couples, and families in psychiatric hospitals and outpatient clinics. So as a result of his broad base of experience, I think it really enabled him to put together this very good, very concise, succinct instruction to people who do want to or don't want to engage in escalating behavior with high conflict personalities. And as Mr. Eddy points out, that back and forth you responding to an HCP with your own Blamespeak gives you a high for about 20 seconds and then you feel really bad. Whereas if you can refrain from engaging in Blamespeak yourself in response to the high conflict personality communication, then you will have a much more lasting and permanent effect. The author has provided national and international training to judges, lawyers, law enforcement, healthcare and college administrators, HOA managers, therapists, and mediators, as well as many other people. BIFF is quite a short paperback book. I think it's under 150 pages, but I downloaded it to my Kindle and to iBooks because I wanted to sort of experiment with sharing the information that was in the book in an easy way wherever I went. I always have my mobile devices with me, but I might not necessarily have a paperback book with me. And I also wanted to see if there was a way to make the book an audible, or make it so that your device could read the book to you, because I find that the more you read this book, the more you learn, and you become better the more you read it. But people like me often don't have time to just sit down and read a book, because we don't have that luxury. And so it's very useful if people like me can listen to the book being read to me while I'm driving, while I'm waiting in line, cooking, getting ready in the morning, exercising, and that's really the only free time I have. So I did figure out a way to do that. I mean, I didn't figure out a way to do that, Apple did, but I'm going to show you how to do that. And hopefully that will make it easier for more people to get access to this really essential tool. Some people might not be native English speakers, and so it may be better for them to have the book read to them in their native language. And so I also am going to explain to you how to set up the speech technology so that your mobile device, your iPad or your iPhone in particular, can read the book to you in any one of these languages. I think I've made it pretty clear, but BIFF works. It works for me every day. It makes my life better. It makes me have less conflict. That's not to say that I'm perfect or that I haven't made mistakes. I have. But what I find now is that I first try to engage in BIFF, and if I'm making less mistakes and engaging in less Blamespeak myself, and if I do, it is after I have made an appropriate BIFF response. There was one notable example in the last 6 months that I regret, but nevertheless, I have learned from this book, and it is making my life easier. And just today I used it 3 times with a colleague, a client, and a contractor. In today's world, HCPs are able to grab the public's attention very quickly and very cheaply. So they're everywhere. They're prolific. They're politicians. They're our supervisors. They're clients, colleagues. They're even our friends and our own relatives. BIFF will show you how to deal with HCPs and how to feel good doing it. It's very easy to read. I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible for you to listen to, even if you have no free time whatsoever. And it covers almost every type of conflict in just 10 chapters. So I'm an immigration attorney, and 2017 is known amongst my colleagues and my clients and the people that I work with in the advocacy community as the year of fear. Immigrants right now, who are my clients, and immigrants everywhere in the United States, they're extremely vulnerable right now, very fearful. They absolutely feel stripped of any ability to legitimately voice their fear and anger at the real targets of their persecution, who are branding them as dangerous criminals. Immigration clients, even non-HCPs, under these circumstances, they may engage in hostile communications with their lawyer, and BIFF can be used to address situationally provoked hostile behavior. Although it's not acceptable, uh, I think this year in particular, immigration lawyers would benefit greatly from using BIFF. This should resonate with every experienced immigration lawyer out there. Has your client ever told you, my situation is all your fault. You took all my money and did nothing. You're a disgrace to your profession. I'm going to report you to your bar association. And then the client will actually proceed to blame the lawyer for his or her immigration status. And of course, that's ludicrous and illogical, but it happens, and it happens regularly. And then if the client is HCP, almost certainly that HCP will jump from lawyer to lawyer to lawyer to lawyer. And we see that a lot as well. And sometimes they jump to HCP lawyers, and those lawyers will contact the original lawyer, and they will also engage in Blamespeak, sending the same type of email communications or messages or letters or voicemails, usually email, blaming the lawyer, not having vetted the information for accuracy, and just repeating what the client has said. His situation is all your fault. You took all his money and did nothing. You're a disgrace to your profession. I'm going to report you to the bar. And then the lawyer will proceed to reiterate an inaccurate history of your relationship with the former client. So BIFF is a good tool to deal with both these situations, both with HCP clients and with HCP colleagues. It is a highly effective tool, and it provides simple instructions on how to gently and not abruptly terminate your relationship with HCPs. There's more specific information in the book on this, which I think is very important. BIFF also shows you when no response is the best response of all, which is also a very simple instruction, but very helpful as well. As I said, just today, I used BIFF 3 times. I use it not only as an immigration lawyer, but I also deal with HCPs in my personal life. For example, my son's, not his coach, but I guess the head coach is an HCP. And so I use BIFF on him all the time. And I was very surprised to read in the book that there are a disproportionate number of HCPs in sports. And I think we can all remember the headbutt from that World Cup tournament. Of course, as of 2017, BIFF is also very useful in today's politically divisive climate. Now, I studied brain lateralization when I obtained my degree from UCLA in California. And then I went on to become a prosecutor, public defender, and investigator. And I have formal training as a forensic interrogator. And I have to say that the science behind BIFF is sound, and it is consistent with everything that I learned both at UCLA and also in my interrogation training. Generally speaking, there are two response methods in our brains for responding to conflict. The right brain is where your very negative, intense, very fight or flight response emotions reside. And you can respond with your right brain almost instantaneously. That has served you well in your life and it has saved your life, for example, by not falling off of a cliff or um, pulling yourself back from a speeding car, something like that. But it's all action. And when you're very upset or the situation is very dangerous, your amygdala actually shuts down the left side of your brain and you're only operating with the right side of your brain. So it's very much all or nothing perception by necessity for survival's sake. If you're thinking and residing, if you're not thinking and instead you're reacting with your right brain. Now, once the person's, we call it an amygdala hijack, that has ceased, and if the person is able to move themselves from the right brain response to the left brain, they can engage in logical problem solving. They can take their time to do a careful analysis of the situation, and they generally feel calm, safe, and content when they are thinking with their left brain. I think this is a very useful illustration of the right brain versus the left brain. And in forensic interrogation, we call it neurolinguistic programming, we actually look for movements, particularly eye movements, that indicate right or left brain activity. And that's very helpful for a forensic interrogator or for investigative discourse analysis. And most of my training is from Don Rabone, and he has a very good, all of his books are kind of like BIFF for forensic interrogators if you're interested in that. And then I've sort of detailed what the amygdala hijack is. Well, I haven't, but I've taken a quote from somebody else. As I said, the goal of BIFF is to shut off the amygdala and to move the HCP from the right brain to the left. If you respond to an HCP communication in Blamespeak yourself, the conversation will continue to escalate. It will not be resolved and the conflict will not be reduced. So we have to train ourselves that during a high conflict moment, it is all about the HCP's inability to manage his or her own emotions and behavior. We have to switch ourselves back to our left side logical problem-solving brains. You can do this. It is proven that you can retrain your brain. And as I said, when I was at UCLA, we actually saw that people could lateralize different functions of their brain to the opposite hemisphere. So it's physiologically possible. And it is only when we ourselves are in our left brain that we can even use BIFF to move the HCP out of their fear response and into their left logical thinking brain as well. In forensic interrogations, we call this moving the subject from the unwilling chair to the willing chair. One of the things that I talked about before was being firm. So being firm can be actually identifying a consequence of doing or not doing something, but it can also be presenting this HCP with two choices. One is obviously good and one is obviously bad. And there's a very good example in the book of I believe it was a air marshal or law enforcement officer who had to board a plane with a very HCP passenger who refused to leave. And it's quite a remarkable story of how the law enforcement officer was able to guide the very belligerent HCP off of the plane by presenting the passenger with choices, but saying that the choice has already been made, and that was the law enforcement officer's choice, and it worked. And as I said before, the author of this book also instructs us to avoid the 3 A's: admonishments, advice, and apologies. Now, apologies, I've spoken about admonishments and advice before, but the apologies part was particularly difficult for me because I'm a first generation Korean American. My parents were immigrants. My father was actually a refugee from North Korea, which is why I began my immigration practice in the first place. I believe that my family has benefited greatly from immigrating to the United States, and that we owe a debt of gratitude to this country for the opportunities that it has given us. Now, my family has very much given back to this country. There are many lawyers in my family, physicians, military members, business people, teachers. Every single person in my family is a good American who contributes greatly to this society. In fact, I have one cousin who is a physician at Cedars-Sinai. He is an MD, an MBA, a PhD, and board certified. But we are first generation Asian Americans. Our culture is different than perhaps other cultures who have been in the United States for many generations. Apologies are not the same thing in our culture as they are in a lot of Americans' minds. Apologies to us are being polite, but the HCP here in the United States will generally use your apology as an admission of blame, of you taking the blame. And so since we want to shift the HCP away from Blamespeak, we cannot apologize. So very curiously, that was the hardest part of all of this for me, because I was raised to apologize as part of my culture and in being polite. And if you talk to any Japanese person, for example, I also attended law school in Japan, you'll always hear Japanese people say sumimasen and gomenasai, and that basically means excuse me, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm sorry. And they use it all the time. And although it literally means sorry, and it is an apology, and that's how it translates to English, it's more of an excuse me, pardon me, like that. So I think there are some cultural aspects to this book that are very instructive as well. As I said, BIFF indicates that, well, in the instructions in the book, the author first asks, when he goes through a plethora of examples, real-life examples, which are also very helpful, is a response required? So before he even asks whether or not your response is a BIFF response, he asks whether or not you even need to respond, and many times you don't. If a BIFF is appropriate, however, the author also points out it should be in the exact same format as the HCP's communication. So if the HCP communicates with you in a very hostile, threatening, aggressive manner by email, you should respond by email. By phone, you should respond by phone. By handwritten letter, you should respond by handwritten letter. In public, you should respond in public to the extent it's possible. So he gives very good, very practical, real-world examples throughout the book. Now I'm going to show you how to set up your phone, your iPhone or your iPad, to read BIFF to you. Now I think you can do this with Google Books and also on your PC, but I did it through my iPhone and iPad. And as I said, because of that, or were it not for me being able to set my phone up to read the book to me, it would be very, very difficult for me to read it, and certainly almost impossible for me to read it 7 times in the same way that I've listened to it 7 times. So how do you set your phone to read BIFF or any document or book to you? and you may not know this, but you can actually download PDFs and open them in iBooks or Kindle, and or long articles, white papers for work, and you can set your phone to read all of these things to you while you're on a long drive or when you're getting ready in the morning or whatever. So this is very helpful, not just for BIFF, but for anybody who doesn't have time to sit down and read. So what you want to do is first open up your settings. In settings, you want to go to General, and then once you hit General, you should see a button called Accessibility. Under Accessibility, you want to check VoiceOver. Actually, you want to check Accessibility Shortcut. Click on Accessibility Shortcut and then choose VoiceOver as the triple click home button. Okay, the reason you want to do this first, even though it doesn't make sense, it's sort of going from the last step and making it the first. The reason you want to do this is because it is insanely painful to not be able to triple click your home button and turn the voice over on and off. It is, that part of the iPhone is very, very difficult. So the first thing you want to do is set up the accessibility shortcut so that the triple click will turn the voiceover on or off. Okay, now we're going to go back and actually substantively set up the voice and all that. Go back to accessibility, go to speech, and under speech, you'll see a whole bunch of different names. Now, don't download all of them because they actually do take up quite a bit of space, as you can see. Like, I don't know why Alex takes up 869 megabytes, whereas Allison only takes up 126. I just chose Samantha because she was the default and it didn't appear to require any additional memory on my iPad or my iPhone. And once again, before you go any further, make sure that you have chosen the triple click accessibility shortcut to turn this function on and off. Otherwise, it's going to drive you crazy. You will know that you have activated the voiceover speech function when you see that little black square that is on the last screen on the right over accessibility. So as long as you can triple click, you can turn it on or off. You would want it on only when reading the book or the PDF document or the article or white paper, or whatever it is you choose to have read to you. Otherwise, what it'll do is the speech function will actually start controlling your phone. And this is actually designed for people who have a vision impairment or who cannot see. And that's why it's set up this way. Now you can also, at the same time, set up your phone to read this or any other book, PDF, article, white paper in your native language. So for example, let's say your native language is Spanish and you feel like you would understand BIFF much better if you were able to listen to it in your native language. So this is a particularly useful tool because you can't necessarily buy BIFF in, say, Turkish or Korean, but you can listen to it in your native tongue very easily. And the way you do that is, again, you go into your settings under General, and this time you're going to go under Language and Region. Here, you'll see the default iPhone language is English. And of course, if we have any native Spanish speakers or anybody from other countries, they already know that they can set their default language on their phone to other languages. But what they might not know is how to set it up so that the speech function will read books in their native language. So that's what I'm going to show you here. On the second screen, you'll choose Add Language, and you can choose as many languages as you like. Here I chose Spanish. And in the next screen, under iPhone language, you'll see that once you've added different languages, and here I've used Australian English, Canadian English, Indian English, Irish English, etc., you can choose what will be your iPhone default language. So I went ahead and changed it to Spanish, and as you can see, the whole phone has changed to Spanish. And now you'll be able to triple click and the book will be read to you in Spanish. I also changed it to Korean, and as you can see, it changed all of my phone settings to Korean. Now that was very, very hard. It took me a while to get back to English from Korean, because although I speak and understand some Korean, I don't read Korean. And so if you don't know the language, don't set your iPhone language to something like Korean, Chinese, Yugoslav, or Turkish, or some language that you just have no idea what it says or means, because you will find it very difficult to get back to your English settings. So don't fool around with it too much. All right. I hope that I've given you a good overview of what an essential tool for just daily living I think BIFF is, not only for immigration attorneys, but for attorneys in general, for mothers, for anybody who's engaged in politically divisive speech, soccer coaches, I just, contractors, your employees. I use it every single day. Other lawyers who I admire either have copies of BIFF on their desk at all times and refer to it every day for years and years and years, or they're like me and they refer to it on their mobile device daily. And that's not an exaggeration. I can't give this book a strong enough recommendation for anybody who deals with any kind of hostile communication, or even prophylactically to stave off hostile communications, or to, I think when you're posting online, especially on social media, so much language is lost in just communicating online. So much so that I think affirmatively taking the BIFF approach can avoid a lot of unnecessary problems from cropping up. So it's not just to be used with HCPs or with one-off hostile communications. I think that, and I do, use BIFF every day prophylactically in all of my non-live interactions with people, and even in my live interactions with HCPs. So I hope that you benefit from this book as much as I have. And if you do, if everybody did, I think our country would be a much better place to live in.